Good morning, everyone. Well, welcome to the 10th TLC Conference. We are so excited to be here, really excited for this panel. I'm Dan Kamins with Comcast. I sit on the Strategic Partnerships team. Again, just thrilled to be in the room today, to be among so many like-minded folks. You're going to hear some incredible information today from our panelists, Danae with Coded by One Philadelphia, Caitlyn with Scholas, and Anuj with the Welcoming Center. I'm going to pass it to them to introduce themselves in a moment, but before they do, these are three of our great partners at Comcast, part of our Project Up initiative, which is our $1 billion commitment to ensure that folks are getting digital skills, digital equity, digital opportunities, and we're reaching millions of folks all over the country doing this work. So with that, I want to start with Anuj, and we'll pass it down to you to just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work that you do at the Welcoming Center.
Good morning. Let me first apologize if my voice is a little hoarse. I'm fully in the clear now, but I'm still getting over a bad case of COVID from last week, so still a little bit in my throat. First of all, thank you for hosting this and Comcast for your support of it. And I just want to introduce my colleague, Jessica Levy, who is our Director of ESOL and Digital Literacy for the Welcoming Center, who does all the hard work with our team. The Welcoming Center was founded on a theory that Philadelphia's growth would rely in large part on our ability to become a destination for immigrants. The organization started in 2003 when we were not an immigrant destination. Less than 6% of our population was foreign-born. We had been on a precipitous population decline that started in 1950 and continued for nearly 60 years unabated. And it was only in 2007 when that ship starts to slowly turn around, and for a 15-year period thereafter, we experienced net growth once again as a city, marginal about 5%, but during that time, the immigrant population in Philadelphia more than doubles. The last 3 years alone, when we've seen the pandemic-fueled exodus out of the city, we've lost about 1.5% of our population. The immigrant population has increased 11%. What does that have to do with what we're talking about today? The Welcoming Center's model is based on the premise that if we can connect and help immigrants gain pathways to upward economic mobility, that more will start to come. Because guess what? No matter where they come from or how they get here, there's only one thing immigrants are coming for. It's opportunity. And if we can help them realize that opportunity through upward economic mobility, we do it through entrepreneurship, work readiness, which includes contextualized English language instruction and digital literacy work, and then leadership development, that if they're able to realize those aspirations here, those communities will start to grow. And that's exactly what's transpired in the last 2 decades in Philadelphia.
Great. Thanks, Anuj. So you're going to hear from Danae and Caitlyn in a second. One of the reasons we selected these 3 organizations is, as Kate mentioned earlier, the idea of sustainable digital equity, right? So Anuj just touched on kind of the entry point for folks, and Danae, I'm going to turn to you now to introduce yourself, and also to talk a little bit about what you're doing at Coded by One Philadelphia. It's a mouthful. And the work that you're doing that aligns to sustainability in digital equity as well.
Yeah, sure, happy to do that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Danae Mobley. I am the CEO of Coded by and One Philadelphia. It's an initiative of Coded by that talks about sustainability, but I'll get to that in a second. So we've been doing this work for over a decade in the Philadelphia region, and that work is very simple, to make sure that Philadelphia tech looks like Philadelphia. And we started the work because what we saw was that underrepresented people were not getting access to opportunity in tech. And where we saw the critical need was starting with young people. So we work with young people ages 8 to 24 to help them not only access opportunity in tech, but how do we make sure that they are leaders and creators in tech fields? We're not starting at the entry point. We're very intentional about making leaders in technology. So we have students that are building their own startups. They are going to post-secondary schools, getting degrees in technology, in web development and user experience design and product management, because we're trying to make sure that we have an economy, a sustainable economy where everyone has wealth generation opportunities. So on the Coded By side, we are really focused on making sure that underrepresented people get access to opportunity, technology, and innovation. Now, because we've been doing that work for a decade, what we saw doing that work in the community with a ton of amazing partners in Philadelphia, and I do want to say, that is the one amazing thing about this room and about the city of Philadelphia. There are a countless number of organizations that are working tirelessly to make sure that there's equity in tech. We've worked with a ton of them over our tenure, and at some point we just said, hey, we know that everyone's doing the work, but we want to raise our hands to be that system level convener to make sure we're all working toward a shared goal. And that's where One Philadelphia comes in. So with some amazing support from sponsors like Comcast, Bank of America, and the Lenfest Foundation, we were able to start One Philadelphia, and that is our initiative to make sure that Philadelphia can be a national tech hub. Over the next 10 years, we want to make sure we are in the top 10. Many people don't know we are already globally in the top 25. We just need to turn the key because Philadelphia already has all the ingredients. How do we make sure that we get Philadelphia from top 25 to top 10? Because we know that we already have the talent here, and it takes a long-term approach to do that work. So at the top of that and the start of that is digital equity. So that's why we're here today, because we care about that to make the whole pathway work.
Thank you, Danae. And Caitlyn, I'll turn to you now to give a little bit of the national perspective. Caitlyn, you're with Scholas, which obviously we've Josh in the room as well, who leads the local team here in Philadelphia. But the work that you're doing from a national perspective is top of the class. So we'd love to have you talk a little bit about the work you're doing there.
Happy to. Good morning, everybody. I'm Caitlyn, Brazill. Thank you so much for having me here. It's fantastic to be able to be talking about the national perspective just from New York, because I feel like Philly is like closer to my home possibly than many parts of New York City. So, but really excited to be part of this. And I have to say, because I am coming from an organization that is across 24 US cities, I spend a lot of time on the road, and I get to interact with and understand the kind of digital equity and tech ecosystems in a lot of different places in the US. And I really do think that what you have here in Philadelphia is something truly special and remarkable. And so I think the fact that you've gathered these folks together, and Kate, the work that you're doing as part of the TLC is very clearly gives you potential collaboration that, trust me, doesn't exist in many other markets. So a little bit about Scholas. We are a national nonprofit. We have been around for just coming up on 30 years. And our mission is to create economic mobility through immersive training for careers in technology. We work with adults of all kinds. We actually pride ourselves on recruiting some of the most diverse possible tech talent pipeline that a company can find. And we partner with about 1,000 employers across the US to create entry and mid-level talent pipelines, as well as to advance their tech workforce. So our model is certainly one that is intense. We ask people to essentially put their lives on hold to shift into a new career, but it's one that's been remarkably effective. And over the last 30 years, we've enabled about 25,000 Americans to launch careers in technology. And collectively, those folks have increased their wages by about $2.1 billion. So there's a real potential for impact.
Thanks, Caitlyn. So I think it's pretty clear why we have these three panelists in front of you today. Anuj, I'm going to start with you. I think that as we're thinking about sustainability and we're thinking about kind of getting folks into the tech ecosystem, the first place to start is arrival to this country and kind of just what is it like when folks are getting here? How are you working with them? So I'd love for you to share a little bit about why it's so critical to catch folks as early as possible and to get them into the field so they're set up for success.
Well, let's start with the premise that there is almost no industry or occupation that we can think of in which a foundation of digital literacy skills are critical. It's almost at the same level as language proficiency, and certainly in your ability to advance your career. So I gave you a lot of numbers about Philadelphia's population trajectories. Let me give you a few numbers about our workforce trajectory. In the last 12 years, 30% of the total employment-based expansion that we have seen in the city of Philadelphia has been through immigration. That the number of immigrants in Philadelphia's workforce has doubled since 2010 and now constitute 1 in every 5 employees across every sector, private, public, nonprofit, so on and so forth. So, and just one more data point for you. The city is expected to grow back to a population of roughly 1.8 million by 2050. And the projections indicate that as almost entirely coming from immigration. So much so that by that point, 25 to 30% of the city is foreign born. That is the growth base of our workforce. And if we don't provide a foundational grounding in digital literacy, we not only stunt their growth, we stunt our collective economic growth. Because if employers don't have the ability to hire the basic talent they need to sustain operations and grow, they have a couple of choices. They can either stunt their own growth, they can close, or they can leave. And those are the choices that you're left with. So it's realizing the demographic trajectories that we're seeing for this city and region and understanding what that means for our workforce. Digital literacy becomes part and parcel of that strategy.
Thanks, Anuj. Caitlyn, turning to you now. You mentioned before, Scholas has been around for almost 30 years, over 20 locations. We'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you're training folks. What does that curriculum look like? How are you ensuring ultimately the success of the learners who come through the Scholas program?
Sure, thanks Dan. And I think it's important to acknowledge this foundation of digital literacy because it underpins our ability to do any of our work, right? When folks come into Scholas, they have to have a base level of knowledge and comfort and digital literacy that we can then build upon. And so there's such a critical importance of those kinds of partnerships and community, and the work that you're doing at the Welcoming Center is a big part of that. The way that we do the work that we do actually really starts with employers. We need to understand what are the demands today, very precisely today, not yesterday, not tomorrow actually. We don't need to be ahead of the demand curve because we create accelerated training models that put people through it's roughly equivalent to a year or two of a college education into about 3 months. So it is full-time, it is 5 days a week, it is replicating in many ways what a common workforce day is going to look like, meaning that we're expecting people to be showing up on time, in professional attire, engaging as a professional throughout their educational experience, but also that we are asking adults to figure out a way to put their life entirely on hold. And it is not easy. It's 7 hours a day of work, and then there's homework. And for many folks who are doing that, they are also working part-time on nights or weekends. So it's a Herculean effort, there's no question about it. And a lot of the ways we're able to see an 85% graduation rate is by, one, working really hard up front to help people figure out how they will prepare for that experience and ensure that they really understand the full package of what they're getting into. And then we wrap supports around those learners. So we have MSW navigators, we have financial coaches. We integrate professional development into our technical skill development. So about 20% of our classroom time is professional development coaches who are helping on communication skills, on leadership development, conflict negotiation, the kinds of things that are really going to make a difference once you are in the workforce and on a team and your ability to contribute. And then in every single market, we have local talent solutions teams that are actually focused on employers. And they are the ones who are identifying opportunities and helping to make those connections. And across the country, we have enterprise level teams who are working with our national partners that are hiring across markets and helping us to spot what are the changes in the marketplace and what new curriculums do we need to create. So today, we have kind of 4 main domains. We have IT and network infrastructure roles, we have cloud, software engineering, and we have cybersecurity. But I'll tell you, every year we are introducing new curriculum, we are changing the content of the curriculum that we have, and that's what's helped us to ensure that we can enable, more than 8 in 10 of our graduates to successfully transition into tech and to, on average, increase their earnings by about 3x what they were earning before for Scholas.
Thank you, Caitlyn. I think what we're hearing here is kind of the welcoming center and the micro approach, kind of individualized approach. And Caitlyn, the national approach is really impressive. Danae, I want to turn to you to talk a little bit about just kind of the need in Philadelphia, right? So I think you mentioned it when you were introducing yourself before. Coded By has been around for a long time, but you started to see that there is really a need to build one Philadelphia and to build the public-private partnership opportunities that are out there. So can you talk a little bit about how you have built that and the work that you've done to make sure that that is an additive component to what is going on in the city?
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk a little bit about that. So with Coded, we always talk about, we use the analogy when we're talking to people, when we're talking about preparing young people, we say that if you have a professional athlete, they don't wake up in 12th grade and decide, oh, I'm going to the NBA, right? This is an intentional effort that happens over a long period of time. And that is the same strategy and thought pattern when we talk about with One Philadelphia. If we're going to create true digital citizens out of Philadelphians, it's a long-term strategy that starts all the way with access and equity, all the way through K-12 education, all the way through. So we have to make sure that all the partners in the coalition, one, we are all aligned toward the same destination, toward the same metrics, but also that we're making sure that every spot on that timeline is filled with someone who's doing that work that can pass people along, or making sure that we're kind of giving them passage and direction toward that end goal. And what we saw a lot early on is sometimes there's redundancy in some places, there are gaps in others. So how can we all come together through One Philadelphia to make sure that where we need to maybe shift and say, you're really good at that, can you focus on that part? Maybe you're actually excellent at this, can we all kind of stay in our spot and really hold our ground so that we can make sure that we're serving Philadelphians the best way that we possibly can. So with One Philadelphia now, we have a coalition of about 30 partners that we work with across the city in kind of 4 key areas. And those are starting with access, digital access and equity, K-12 education, talent and workforce, and entrepreneurship. And then we work toward 3 key goals because of that. So those goals are, 1, that any underrepresented Philadelphian would be able to start their own tech-enabled startup if they so choose. And or on the other side of that, we say that underrepresented Philadelphians can access opportunities in tech and innovation, 1, with a traditional education path or with a non-traditional education path. Those are our 3 metrics to know that we've been successful at the end of this journey. And the way that we really try to do that is we try to make sure we are not competing, right? There's always a ton of competition. We're all trying to do good work, but there are finite things like funding and populations to serve. So how do we make sure that we're complementing one another and we are not competing? And a lot of the ways that we do that, so as we think about funding now, I've seen a lot of great efforts recently in Philadelphia where there have been large initiatives for funding, and we work together to say, what does this team look like? How can we come together as multiple organizations, tell a Philadelphia story together, and we all have our part without leaving anybody out? I think that is an amazing shift forward that we've been able to start doing that work. That's something I think is greatly complementary and not competitive for Philadelphia. through One Philadelphia, we've been able to provide operating support to other nonprofits that are doing tech equity work. So that's another way that we try to make sure that people can still do the work that they're doing. The other pillar that we have that we really try to focus on is the national narrative around Philadelphia. I hate to say that I know we just lost, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna bring it up, I know it's painful, I will not the wound, just Dan, stop. I'm trying to get you out of here today, I know you're a New York person, I'm trying to get you out, don't start. So, I'm just saying, we do have an underdog mentality in Philadelphia, and while that is fantastic for sports, it is not fantastic for how we market ourselves outside of Philadelphia and the great things that we're doing. So as a national tech hub, we try to also work with all of our coalition partners to have a narrative about everything that is going well, the great things that are happening in Philadelphia, because when we feel like that rises everyone. When we can talk about Philadelphia, attract new people, attract new businesses, that's something we're trying to do to complement the work and make sure that everyone is getting what they need to do the work.
You say you're trying to get me out of here, you're trying to get me killed. Because I was not going to talk about baseball. And then you just, the shoes gave it away. The shoes gave it away. Well, I have a tablecloth in front of me so nobody can see my shoes right now. Today you touched on kind of the idea of a pipeline, right? And I think that that is such an important component here that there's no organization, there's no one entity that's going to cure all of this. We have to come together and work together to do that. And so Anuj, I'm going to turn to you then, because with that in mind, and as we think about kind of the theme of the day and sustainability, we'd love to have you talk a little bit about how you're working with the folks who come to the Welcoming Center to ensure that they have access to resources and services so that they are truly able to sustain the training that they get from you and take that to the next step, whether it is with you or with another organization.
I didn't know you were a Mets fan.
I wasn't gonna say anything. I really
I know what to
wasn't.
say.
I've already gotten cursed out by somebody over there.
So painful. Okay. What we find with participants when they come into the Welcoming Center is that they will start in a particular program area as an entry point, and quite often they will then avail themselves of many of our other program areas, in some cases, almost all of them. Now, our contextualized English work, and keep in mind, we're not a place that you come to where you just arrived in the US and you need some conversational English language instruction. You come to us for English geared towards economic advancement. We have programs like English for job search, English for workplace communications, once you're in a workplace and that's a barrier to your advancement. That and the digital literacy work that we are now doing, and all of this has expanded substantially just in 1 year alone with Jessica and her team doing phenomenal work. That is a foundation. You can't really go through our entrepreneurship program or our international professionals program or even our leadership development work without some of those baseline skills. So it's an entry point, and then we hope that participants, after they've finished our digital literacy work and or ESOL work, then stay with us for some of those other programs so that they really get on that pathway where their economic trajectory looks like this. What we are trying to help newcomers to the city and region avoid is getting stuck in what we call survivor jobs. It's not, there is a lot of truth to the adage that if you get into a cab, if you can still find one, or rideshare in Philadelphia, talk to your driver. I can almost guarantee that that individual, for whatever their country of origin was doing something quite extraordinary back home. They were architects, they were engineers, they were physicians, they were lawyers, and they come here and there's a variety of barriers in their way to making a lateral move. So our model is holistic in that they can start with us as an entry point, and then they can continue through that entrepreneurship pathway, they can continue through community leadership, through work readiness, and then ultimately get to a point where they are realizing their economic aspirations. And of course, if there are other social services, if they're in need of legal assistance, there's plenty of partners that we work with in our ecosystem to refer them to.
Thanks, Anuj. Caitlyn, coming to you next. I think the Welcoming Center could very easily act as a pipeline for you, for learners. I think there's probably a ton of other organizations in this room that also could serve as a pipeline to find learners to be part of the Scholas program. So can you talk a little bit about how you do work with partners, both locally and nationally, to find learners who can potentially be part of the Scholas program?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say the Welcoming Center has, in fact, been a part of that pipeline, as well as Project Home and a number of other organizations in the city. You know, I think how we work with the ecosystem of any market that we are in is basically through kind of mutual understanding of the folks who are likely to succeed in our model, right? So I think we know that in order for someone, as I mentioned, to put their lives on hold for 3 months, they have to be in a place of relative stability, right? And so we often work with organizations like housing authorities, the Housing Authority here in Philadelphia, to ensure first that we're talking about people who have stable housing. We also do a pretty real vetting up front when people have expressed interest to see what other kinds of support services individuals might need in order to effectively participate at Scholas, right? So what is your child care plan? What is your transportation plan? How will you actually financially support yourself over that time period? These are all really important considerations, and the kind of thing that is so incredibly helpful and magnified by other organizations who are doing great work in the community. You know, I was thinking about some of our learners who've gone through this journey here in Philadelphia and what that initial recruitment looked like. And I was actually thinking about a gentleman, David, who is now one of my colleagues at Scholas. And he came to us during the pandemic. He was laid off from a security guard job, went to the Philadelphia Career Source right down the street from our office, and he was trying to figure out what to do next. And obviously this was during lockdown mode. It was very difficult to figure out what opportunities might exist. But they, talked to him about his interests, about what he had done, his passions, and he talked about how he loved taking things apart and putting them back together again. And he had always had this interest in technology and was always the person that everybody went to when their computer was fixed or computer needed to be fixed or phone was broken. And he got a recommendation for Scholas. I'd never heard of it. We were relatively new in town. I think we'd been here in Philadelphia for about 6 months. But he took the leap and did a completely remote IT support class. This is our early days of offering completely remote classes, so he was bold in a number of ways. What was really interesting to me is before he was laid off, he was a security guard in the Comcast tower. And he got to the end of training, he graduated, he earned his A+ certification. He got connected to one of our really strong partners, a company called Tech Systems, and he ended up getting placed on the help desk at Comcast. And it was such an exciting moment for him because he had spent so much time waiting at the bottom of the elevator, and this time he got to get on it. He worked there for a couple of years, really, really enjoyed it. But when we had an opening back at Scholas for an instructional fellow role, he jumped on board because it had been so transformational to him to be able to gain this new skill set and start to develop a new career. And really, he wanted to turn his passion and knowledge into helping the next set of folks here in Philadelphia to build their careers.
Thanks, Caitlyn. That's a really great story. I'm really glad you shared that. Danae, coming back to you, thinking about partners like the Welcoming Center, partners like Scholas and so many others in the room, the digital equity sustainability is going to take all of us, right? And no pun intended, you are truly working to build one Philadelphia. So can you talk a little bit about how you are working with partners to make sure that we are, like you said before, not competing with each other necessarily, but instead complementing each other and working together to ensure that we get towards digital equity sustainability.
Yeah, happy to do this. I know I talked a little bit about it in my previous answer, but I think one of the things that's also, other than the operating support and, we do a ton of convening, the thing that I think that we're trying to do to be complementary is also just getting people around a shared vision, right? Once we get that shared vision of, okay, this is where we can go, how do we also help people think about their role in the ecosystem? So when we're thinking about complementary support for folks, that's looked like us hosting, twice a year, coming together and saying, okay, these are the next big ideas in Philadelphia. How do we not only get you to get that message out there, but how are we also introducing funders, bringing everyone to the table so that we can work to make sure that people are really thinking about not only what's present, but also what's future for Philadelphia. I think we have a lot of exciting things that we're thinking about when we bring partners together and looking at potential collaborative models for different houses or fellowships, and how do we think about how we bring Philadelphians into that? Because what I think is really key about One Philadelphia as well is it's not just about attracting new talent to Philadelphia. We already have a ton of talent here. So what are our retention models look like where we can start pulling from all the organizations that are doing the work so that they can really find pockets of Philadelphia maybe they weren't working in before, but how do we give them access to that? So a lot of our model too now is also working with great partners like the Chamber and others to start thinking about what research and data can we start bringing to the coalition to help better inform the work that we do. We're trying to make sure that we can be a backbone and infrastructure to organizations that may be emerging, right? We have a lot of great organizations that have been around for a while, but how can we provide that infrastructure support, whether it be through data research, to those organizations so that they can get from phase 1 to phase 2 much faster than some organizations just like us, right? That first phase took us 5 years to kind of grow up to the next evolution of Coded By. We don't want that to be the case for other people if it doesn't have to be.
Caitlyn, coming back to you for a sec. Digital equity work, whether it's digital skilling, certifications, training, whatever it may be, all of this needs to have an end game, which is truly corporate partnership, right, and employers. So can you talk a little bit about how you work with companies to ensure that you are finding opportunities and creating programs that ultimately fit into a sustainable model of hiring and ultimately growth?
Yeah, well, I mean, to pick up on Danae's point, it starts with the data, right? You need to take a look at where there's actual employer demand and start there. And I think we've always tried really hard to, I love entrepreneurship. We are not actually creating jobs. We are looking for the jobs that are there and trying to create accessible pathways to them. And so that's our number one. I would say the second piece is working with employers, and we work with employers of all sizes. I would say, interestingly enough, when I look across all of the job attainments that our learners have, actually the vast majority are with small and mid-sized firms. So it's not just the major corporates, it actually is thinking about the broader business community and trying to help people think a little bit different about hiring. One of the things that I think is critically important, has been a really valuable movement nationally, is thinking about skills-based hiring. And what that means is really taking a look at what are the skills and competencies I'm looking for, and how do I measure them in a way that is reliable? And I think one of the challenges that we have, not just here in Philadelphia, but across the US in our hiring process, is that today we use these proxies that are education and years of experience, right? That's like the two easy ones, right? And they're just a proxy, and often they're not a great proxy. If what you really need is somebody who has networking skills, who understands, routers and switches, you don't know whether they actually have that knowledge based on those years of experience. and a degree. And so what we do is we filter out lots of people who may be very qualified by using these really imprecise proxies. And so that's one of the things that we're trying really hard to work with employers to think differently, not just about expanding the pipeline, but actually sharpening it to those who are likely to be able to succeed in those roles. I think the other thing, and I have to say, like, I've got to give some real credit to Comcast locally, and there's a number of other companies that we're working with to also look at upskilling pathways. So one of the things that we did at Scholas starting about 4 years ago is we launched something called Career Accelerator. And it is stackable credentials that build on top of our immersive training and that can help people get to the next steps in their career. This helps us in a number of ways. This helps our learners get to a thriving wage, which is our North Star. It also helps to create new entry-level openings, right, if you advance people through the company. But for employers, it also creates immense savings. It is much cheaper to develop an employee and move them into mid or senior level roles than it is to hire externally for those same roles. It is a better investment for your company and much more likely that you're building people who understand your products, your services, your corporate culture. And so that, I think, is a place where all of us can be working collectively to think more intentionally about how to create pathways that extend beyond that first step on the ladder and get people to where they really want to go.
Well, if I turn my microphone on, yeah, I might be able to say one thing. I just say the last part of what you said I think is incredibly important because while we're all talking a lot about tech careers, you know, we know with the work that came out of the National Skills Coalition, 90% of jobs are going to require digital skills, whether it is a tech job or not. So this work is even important outside of the tech workforce, right? Like everybody that we know in this room and future generations are going to need a base level of tech skills that start at digital equity and access. So, you know, I just wanted to kind of underpin that this is not just for the employers and just for the technologists. It really is key to our next phase of economic mobility and development.
Spot on. I'm glad you turned your mic on successfully.
It's the small things.
Yeah, they all heard it now because of that. So, well done. Anuj, I'm going to come to you in a second, but before I do, just want to say we have time at the end set aside for questions from the audience, so start to think. If you guys have questions for the panelists, start to think about those because we're coming up on the end of my list of questions. But Anuj, similarly to what I asked Caitlyn, we'd love to have you talk a little bit about how you're working with the folks that you're training to ensure that they are able to successfully transition to career.
It's a couple of things. Number one, we now have a great friend at the Chamber of Commerce, Nikki Pumphrey, who was our deputy director for many years, and was at Scholas as well. So we have a voice at the table in the corporate community to express what immigrant talent means for our current workforce needs and our future growth needs. The Welcoming Center started with a model whereby any immigrant job seeker would come to us, we would hustle and put phone calls in, and we'd find a job. And we thought that was a victory. And maybe for a short period it was a victory, because everyone needs to get grounded and settled and get some money on the table. But what we quickly realized was it wasn't a sustainable path for either the participant or the employer. Because if the job isn't a fit, either you're overqualified, you don't have the English proficiency, maybe you don't have sufficient digital literacy, etc., it's not going to work out in the long run. And so we evolved to a model where we have a very, what I would consider a high-touch approach, where we are taking our participants through an 8-week pathway in which we provide sort of generalized job readiness training and education to give them the understanding of the nuance, the process of how to successfully navigate the American job search process and then succeed once they're in it. You'd be surprised at how different it can be for folks coming from other parts of the world. Even the way they present their resume can be substantially different. And if they were to present the resume that they utilize in their country of origin, they would fall to the bottom of the stack because the HR recruiter simply doesn't have time to figure out what's going on there or what that individual has to lend to the organization. So one, we take this high touch approach, and then we work very hard with corporate partners to try to find them a position, one, which offers upward mobility, and two, has some lateral relationship to what they were doing in the country of origin. We can't take a doc and get them back into practicing medicine. But if they're working the midnight shift at a diner, or they're driving rideshare, we can certainly get them back into healthcare. We can't take a lawyer who hasn't taken the Pennsylvania bar back into practicing law. But is that individual trained to be an advocate? Absolutely. Can that individual be a paralegal and get themselves in a law firm setting and study for the bar? Absolutely. So that's the approach that we take, and we have some great, both public and private partners. The city of Philadelphia has been a terrific partner. PICO has been an excellent partner. And we try to get them into the right position, not just a position. And then there's one other part of, if I can just add on a comment, there's one other part of our model I want to talk about, which I think makes the Welcoming Center quite unique, which is our community leadership work. The theory is, if you come home every day from work or the business that you're trying to get started, and you feel isolated, you feel disconnected, you feel like you have no capital to address the barriers that are affecting your day-to-day life, your family's day-to-day life, that's going to halt your economic acceleration. You're going to carry that with you the next day in the workplace or back in your storefront or your business. And so the organization started the Immigrant Leadership Institute in 2017 with the idea of helping first-generation immigrants understand that they don't have to just put their head down and have a passive existence here in the United States. They can become contributors, engaged members of their new communities. They can become change agents for the barriers that they're facing. They don't just have to wait for the next generation, my sister and I, to take reins of and take on leadership positions. And I think that approach then also helps them in their economic acceleration. Once they're in the right job, they can advance. They're able to realize their full selves in their new home.
Such a good point, Anuj. Thank you for adding that at the end there. I'm going to ask one last question of each of you, and like I said, we'll go to the full group for Q&A. I want to talk a little bit about what works, what doesn't work, challenges to avoid. So Danae, let's start with you on this. Can you talk a little bit about just what happens when we don't look at systems level changes and instead we're just looking at smaller scale changes?
Oh man, so there's this kind of quote that's like, busyness doesn't really mean that there's action, right? So when we look at small scale without looking at the systems level change, what I find is there's a ton of activity with no real momentum and no real impact. And I think that in a city like Philadelphia especially, we owe it to Philadelphians to have thoughtful consideration of their journey from start to finish. And oftentimes it requires the system to do that. We are all heads down doing the work that matters, but we don't always have the time. It takes a lot, and we don't always have the time to look up and kind of look at that, oh, okay, let me kind of think about the larger system. That's why it's so important to have those kind of shared metrics, that collective system, and have someone's responsibility. What we're trying to do with One Philadelphia is say, hey, the work that you're doing is great, and it plugs into this bigger idea. How do we make sure that everyone is in their right spot doing the work? So the way that we kind of think about that is, if you're only thinking about your part, you actually lose you lose economies of scale. So we actually use the example, we talk about employment, right? So if we want to attract another big employer in Philadelphia, they say, I need to fill 100 spots. many of the organizations in Philadelphia alone that are doing that work couldn't do it alone, but if we got 3 of them together, if we got Scholas and a couple other organizations together, we would then be able to collectively say, hey, employer A, we can now fill your need. But doing that alone, we can't do. But that's where collective impact and having a systems level approach really works. I think that, there's also a world where we're looking at having no one being able to do everything for everybody. When we talk about that long-term approach, we need to thoughtfully hand people off to their next thing. We can't just say, we did this part, and here you go. If we can have a systems level approach, those handoffs can alleviate a lot of times where people are kind of going off a cliff or going the wrong way. We can make sure that they are still progressing the way that they need to. And I also hope that a systems level approach can really help us demonstrate the collective impact that Philadelphia has had over time. It's really hard to show with just one organization, like this is everything that's been done, but I think we can really see all the growth that's happening in Philadelphia if we start thinking more at that systems level, when we tackle the real things that are not, we talk about poverty, how it's persistent in Philadelphia. There are many different organizations that need to do that work. We talk about the wraparound services that many of these organizations provide, but we're gonna need a larger umbrella to think about that systems level change. And if we're only thinking about small scale, we will not be able to think about the collective impact. We also won't be able to build resiliency for the system. We've seen, the economy with the ups and downs, we've seen organizations have to close, have to shift. When we can build in resiliency in the system, we can shift things around a little bit easier. So I'm hoping that at that systems level, we can really make sure that we have a long-term approach for Philadelphians.
Thanks, Danae. Caitlyn, you're focused on workforce, obviously. Can you talk a little bit to the room about how using digital literacy builds a better workforce and any of the key learnings or challenges that you've seen at Scholas?
Going to this kind of systems change piece, I think one of the things that I can see, and that is a challenge when we are working with employers, everyone agrees, and I personally agree, that I think it makes a ton of sense to, you're starting something new, start it small, and then let it grow, right? I think the challenge, though, is when you create kind of specialized programs, right? We've got this new thing over here. It doesn't necessarily scale and change the overarching approach to hiring or your policies or the way that your hiring managers are operating. And I think that becomes a real challenge, especially at moments like this one, where we've seen across the country many of the initiatives that were started over the last few years that were really focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, shrinking, moving, evolving. The ones that were systematically embedded in existing strategy and existing talent acquisition and talent development, they remain quite resilient. The ones that were specific kind of sideline programs, that's much easier to kind of shut down and move on to something else. And I think we're just seeing that play out in real time. I think an important challenge and lesson that I would take away from that is yes to piloting, and think really quickly about how that's going to move into scale, and ensure that we're designing from the outset something that could be scaled, something that's not so labor intensive or so outside of existing policy that it would be hard to influence the whole system.
Anuj, we'll close with you. Any key learnings, things that did or didn't work for you that you'd want to share with the room from your work at the Welcoming Center?
I actually will underscore what I think Danae explained very well, which is this need to pursue change, whether we're talking about digital literacy or frankly any other social dynamic, through systems level collaborative approaches. This is my own personal opinion. It's not just informed my work at the Welcoming Center, but all of my prior career experiences in the public and nonprofit sector here. We too often operate from a mindset of scarcity in this city, meaning there's a limited amount of monetary support, whether it's government, corporate or philanthropic. We want to get as much of that as possible for ourselves, potentially to the demise of others that we could or should be working with. And the consequence of that is you limit your own impact. The pie actually grows when we do it in collaboration, when we take the systems level approach philosophically, we philosophically embed that in how we do our day-to-day work. And I think the more that we move towards that, the easier it will be to solve some of the complex challenges that we're facing, no matter what population we're serving.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you guys, thank the three of you for your responses so far. I want to open it up now to any questions from the audience. We have a few minutes if there are any that come up. I don't know if we're going to run mics.
Thank you very much. Anuj, I have a question. Where are the immigrant populations coming from? And if they have digital skills, we need multilingual digital navigators. So putting a digital equity lens on your work, do you have any, where are they coming from? So the languages. And B, do you have connections so you know how to connect with those resources throughout the city who employ digital navigators, many of whom are in this room?
The first part of your question, Toby, the general top 5 country of origin for immigrants coming to Philadelphia, it's relatively stable, but there's year-to-year fluctuation. It's China, India, Dominican Republic, Mexico, and what is the 5th? Might still be Vietnam. Jamaica sometimes gets up there. And then, of course, depending on worldwide events, you might see some shifts in that, whether it's Afghanistan, Ukraine, or other reasons for people to be coming here. The digital navigator question, and then frankly, if there's mics in the audience, I would actually ask my colleague Jessica to comment on this, because I think we're about to launch a project exactly to that end. Yeah, sort of, Jessica? Can you talk about that?
I had a feeling that was going to happen. Thanks, Anuj. I stopped eating my bagel just so I could get ready. Good morning, everybody. So in terms of connecting with the digital navigators, we're really grateful for that network. So Kieran at BLIT, CMAC is one at Drexel, there's one, a site for that. It's a great resource for everybody in the city. We are going to be, we have recognized that the folks who are coming through our programs, immigrants who are coming here are a resource, right? If we think about teaching English, it's not a deficit model, it's multilingualism is a strength. And what we're hoping to do with some incoming funding now is to develop a core of people who have some level of digital skills who can also utilize their multilingual abilities to support other folks to become more proficient in digital skills as well. Could go into more detail about that, but I think it's a nice interconnection with the digital navigator model, which is already in place, and I think it would be wonderful to think about how that work that we're thinking about doing could connect with also being a pipeline for people to be involved as digital navigators and other things that are happening in the city that really need people who can speak multiple languages and also have a lot of different cultural connections as well.
I think we have time for one more question. I see one there. We'll see if we have time for two, but definitely one more. Is there one here? Yeah, you've got the mic. You do it.
I'll be quick. Do any of your organizations serve our citizens returning from mass incarceration?
I'm happy to answer for Scholas. Yes, we certainly do. And I will say we're seeing more employers who are, I think this actually is a place where we've seen real policy change in terms of evaluating, justice-related history in any kind of employment application, but there are still very real barriers, and particularly in some of the disciplines in which we train, like cybersecurity, we advise people against it. It's just that the barriers are so high.
Yeah, I'll just say that on the side. But on One Philadelphia side, we do make sure that we make the community welcome to those individuals, but we don't have any targeted programming at this time for that population.
Similarly, anyone that feels like they can gain value from the Welcoming Center's programs, and by the way, it's not just immigrants. We have a lot of native-born individuals that come through our entrepreneurship program, for example. But anyone that wants to avail themselves of our programs is welcome to do so. There's no background litmus test whatsoever.
Yeah, time for one more.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Sierra, and I work for the Free Library in Philadelphia. We have recently seen an influx of the Haitian community coming into our libraries. I want to say last month it was a young lady that's been here for maybe about 2 months. She was looking for resources. When we tried to find the resources, I tried to call the Job Center. I believe that's what it's called. And he said that they had to apply for welfare, and then they would send them to, they would connect them to the right resources. Is that the only way to gain you all's resources? Can they come to the Welcoming Center? Do they have to fill something out in order to apply for services?
The easiest thing to do is just to send them to our website, and they can start applying for our programs through that. They are also welcome to call and, of course, come into our office. We're in Center City, just a block north of the convention center. So multiple ways to access us. We do, I don't know that we're doing enough at, are you at Central branch? Oh, which branch? Oh, CCB Moore. We've started utilizing the Free Library branches in the Northeast quite a bit to promote and create awareness about our programs. Frankly, I'd love to do that in more branches. The library is the first point of contact for institutional contact for many people from around the world that are coming here for the first time. It's such an important gateway. So to the extent that we can partner more with the Free Library, I would love to talk about that.
He hosts trainings with us sometimes, the digital research specialists. We are the first contact with the patrons because we help them on the computers with their resumes and different things like that. So if you can connect with him when we do one of our trainings, maybe you can come and talk to us and let us know how we can access the services so we can help our community.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, thank you guys. Anyone who knows me knows I generally think in threes, so 3 things to wrap us up. 1, it is absolutely freezing up here, so if you see our hair blowing or us shivering, it is really cold up here. 2, please thank the panelists, Anuj, Caitlyn, Danae. And 3rd, I would be remiss if we didn't just acknowledge Kate and David for the incredible work that you guys did to bring this all together year over year, and just to thank you guys. So with that, I will pass to Ricky. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let's give another round of applause to our incredible panel. I'm having this sort of incredible weird meta experience in that these 3 individuals are incredible leaders, and they've all had quite an impact on my life personally. So I'm so glad that they were here today to also share with you the work that they've been doing.